This BBC podcast is supported by ads outside the UK.
I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig from the Global Jigsaw podcast from the BBC, where we explore President Putin's idea of what it is to be Russian. It's packed up in one expression that's become the catchphrase of the moment, the Russian cultural code. We ask, what does it mean? The Global Jigsaw looks at the world through the lens of its media. Find us wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello, it's Ray Winstone. I'm here to tell you about my podcast on BBC Radio 4, History's Toughest Heroes. I've got stories about the pioneers, the rebels, the outcasts who define tough.
And that was the first time that anybody ever ran a car up that fast with no tires on. It almost feels like your eyeballs are going to come out of your head.
Tough enough for you? Subscribe to History's Toughest Heroes wherever you get your podcast.
Hello. Today we're in Madagascar, where student protests over the power supply have morphed into demands for radical political change. We're in the South Atlantic and the volcanic outpost of St. Helena, where locals are being lured elsewhere to find their fortune. At a biennial in Uzbekistan, we witness the country's cultural scene springing back to life. And finally, climbing high in Bolivia, we hear how the country's indigenous women, or cholitas, are gaining in political clout. But first, we're in western Ukraine, where 5 people were killed and tens of thousands were left without power after intense Russian missile and drone attacks last weekend. The city of Lviv endured hours of strikes, leading to the suspension of public transport and the city's electricity supply. Meanwhile, recruitment into Ukraine's army continues to fall, even though the government lowered the conscription age. Those who work in the army's recruitment office are often feared. Videos of men trying to escape the draft are all over social media. But the recruitment office is also responsible for bringing soldiers home when they're killed in action. Richard Pendry accompanied an army officer in Lviv whose job it is to bring the worst possible news to families.
The sound comes first, high-pitched, ragged, full of pain. For a moment, it unsettles passers-by. People pause, unsure what they're hearing. It's a sunny day, and the noise echoes off the Soviet-era blocks of flats all around. In the garden of a children's nursery, a middle-aged woman is sitting on a bench, sobbing. Beside her stands a man in uniform. One hand rests gently on her shoulder. In the other, a letter. She turns on him suddenly, her voice cracking with fury. "You are a bad man, a bad uncle." Major Serhiy Lazyuk, the man in the uniform, is a slim, thoughtful man who before the war prepared legal contracts in a firm of architects. He later reflects that she spoke to him as if to one of the children she works with. Maybe that's why it came out that way, he says. The scene offers a glimpse into his grim daily work, delivering death notices across Lviv, far from the front lines, but never far from the consequences of war. Major Lazyuk's job is a task no one else wants. Colleagues don't want to cover for him, so he rarely gets time off. What really gets to him is when people blame him for the deaths. They hear he works for the Army Recruitment Office and hold him responsible. "You drafted him," they say. "You sent him off." That hurts. But he understands. It's stress. Grief. He's trained not to take it personally. He just happens to be the one standing there, the one they can shout at. Still, it's hard. He's been doing this since the very start of the war, well over 3 years. Some days it's 2, even 3 visits, hundreds of death knocks. There are 2 other officers doing this job in other parts of Lviv. He stays in touch with the families of the deceased for weeks after. He arranges for their loved ones to be returned, viewed, buried. He tells me he gets heart palpitations, his hands shake, his emotions, he says, feel frozen. If the full range of feeling is 100%, he says, I'm operating at 10. He no longer laughs. He just gets through. Serhiy is religious, a member of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. He believes this is his calling. They're less afraid when I'm there, he says of the families. The irony, of course, is that his presence terrifies people. Major Lazyuk's work lays bare why so many Ukrainian men are frightened to enlist. Ukraine last updated its casualty figures in February, when President Volodymyr Zelensky acknowledged that more than 46,000 Ukrainian soldiers had been killed. Independent Western analysts believe this is an underestimate. Tens of thousands are missing, either dead or in captivity, but the trenches still need holding. If they collapse, so does the country. All men aged 25 to 60 are liable for military service, but the pool of willing volunteers dried up long ago. Forced mobilisation is now the norm, and it's got a nickname: bussification. It describes what happens when a man, without exemption or deferral, is caught by a recruitment patrol. He's placed in a van, driven under escort to a medical. Unlike volunteers, those caught don't get a say in what they do or where they go. They're usually sent straight to 6 weeks of infantry training, and then the front. Earlier this year, Ukraine launched a glossy campaign to attract 18 to 24-year-olds with high wages and benefits. It barely made a dent. Only a few hundred signed up. Meanwhile, there have been Telegram channels dedicated to tracking recruitment officers. Men avoid public transport. They change addresses. Some barely leave home. This is the atmosphere Major Lazyuk works in. On another morning, a soldier from the Azov regiment is being buried in the new military cemetery. The original one filled up within months of the full-scale invasion. Serhiy had done the notification 2 weeks earlier. Since then, the family had kept the body at home. At the funeral, there's a military band, a short, sharp speech from a commander. The coffin is lowered quickly, cleanly. Gravediggers shovel in soil. He's quiet throughout. He had previously approached the family, who are consumed by grief, at the church. Now he stands at the back, observing. After lunch, there's another letter in his jacket, another visit, another mother or father or partner. Grief has become part of the routine. Serhiy wants the war to be over. I really want that, he says firmly. But he knows that even after the last shell has fallen, his work won't stop. There will be men to find, still missing, bodies to return from occupied areas, maybe even from inside Russia. It could take years, and someone will need to do that with care too.
Richard Pendry. Over recent months, youth movements in Nepal, Morocco and Indonesia have shaken their respective governments. Now Madagascar's Gen Z has taken to the streets. The protests began with demands to fix persistent water and electricity cuts, but now they're targeting the political system itself and the country's president. This Indian Ocean island, which is one of the world's poorest countries, has seen multiple uprisings since its independence from France in 1960. But this new generation is different. Luke Freeman reports from the capital.
The voice is cracked, the French is flawed, the tone is crude, but the message is blisteringly eloquent. We need water. We need electricity. Students can hardly study. We've had enough. We want an education like the children of this country's leaders. This is the cry from the streets of Antananarivo, flashed around the world via millions of cell phones, a visceral, viral clip of Gen Z anger. They protest that while students at Madagascar's universities are living in undeniable squalor, the president and many of his ministers send their children to elite European schools. Tuki and Sami, both studying law, show me the dormitory they share with 4 other young men at the National University, high on the eastern fringes of the city. It's a damp, fuggy space with peeling walls, 3 bunk beds squeezed together, and a wobbly table where the roommates study and prepare their meals. Their breakfast, a pan of sweet potatoes, boils on a charcoal stove on the landing. We sold our hot plate, says Tuki, because there's never any electricity. We share a laptop, but it doesn't work unless it's plugged in. And then there's no light, so we can't read after dark. How are we supposed to study? Anyway, he complains dryly, our professors don't turn up because they haven't been paid. Sami shows me the 2 noxious bathrooms serving the floor's 60 students. The taps are not connected, so each dorm has a 20-litre jerry can which they fill from a communal standpipe in the yard below, usually after midnight when the water comes back on. With lectures currently cancelled, the students are out on the street almost every day. From their hilltop campus they march exuberantly down towards the city centre, waving handwritten banners made from tattered bedsheets. Water and education are rights. No to corruption. Give us a future. Their main demand is spelt out in just 2 words. Radzuelina out. Tuki's girlfriend Marietti, petite but forthright, wearing a skull and crossbones t-shirt, explains what's behind this anger. When he was elected, the president promised that he'd sort out the water and the electricity, but it's worse than ever. He just lies. He must go, she insists. At a town hall-style meeting at his palace, mainly attended by government supporters, Mr. Radzuelina asked for 1 year to fix the problems, promising that if they persist, he'll resign. But for the time being, he's going nowhere. His tactic has been to prevent any critical mass from gathering in the city centre by inserting a cordon of military police on all the main roads. At every roadblock, we witness the same scene. A passionate, buoyant group of young people in flip-flops and pirate bandanas, obstructed by an implacable line of armed police in heavy boots, body armour and riot helmets. Courteous negotiations ensue over the right to demonstrate, until the police receive a radioed instruction to disperse the crowd. Suddenly, the atmosphere flips. "Get back," yells the commandant, and then the rapid pock-pock-pock of rubber bullets and stifling white plumes of tear gas scatter the protesters, who pull their bandanas down over their eyes and noses as they flee. Reporters from the national press weave between the armoured cars, capturing footage for the evening news. But the protesters do their own media work. Theirs is a smartphone revolution that deals in video clips and memes. This style of demotic, democratic journalism is the antithesis of the government's communications strategy. Ponderously worded press releases for the next day's papers, the stiffly ritualised inauguration of the new Prime Minister, an Army General, by the way. Meanwhile, the President's spokesman conducts interviews in polished metropolitan French under studio lights in faraway Paris, wearing a sharp suit and silk tie. The fluidity of the Gen Z Matter movement, as it's become known, has wrong-footed the government. Street rallies organised at the last minute on social media allow demonstrators to outrun the police. The activists' preferred platform, Discord, ensures anonymity. Their egalitarian structure means there are no leaders that the government can indict for insurrection. This youth-led revolt is new here. Previous uprisings have mostly featured head-on clashes between senior political figures. We may only be young, but we are the majority, argues law student Tuki. And he's right. More than 70% of Madagascar's population is under 30. On the surface, these protests are about water and electricity and education. But at a deeper level, they're about something bigger. An existential fight for a dignified future for millions of Gen Zs around the world. "I'll be out on the street again tomorrow," says Tuki, "and if they shoot me, then they shoot me. But they can't shoot all of us."
Luke Freeman. Next to the remote volcanic island of St. Helena, a British overseas territory in the South Atlantic Ocean. Home to just 4,000 people, the island largely depends on British grants and remittances from abroad. And while it's renowned for its natural beauty and marine life, its location makes it difficult to be self-sufficient. Its mobile phone network only appeared 10 years ago. As a result, it's a place many locals long to leave, to find their fortunes elsewhere. Beth Rose was there for recent elections and spoke to islanders about their fears for the future.
"You cannot buy babies in shops," the Bishop of St. Helena warned on local radio days before voting began in the general election. "We are about to fall off a cliff edge." That cliff edge is in the middle of the South Atlantic, on an island halfway between South America and Africa, and famed for being the place of Napoleon's final imprisonment and death. In the weeks before the vote, the election fever had been mild, and the buzz was low, even though the island is under threat. Not from the shark, which recently cut through the waters and scared swimmers back onto land, but depopulation and an ageing community. The number of people born on this British overseas territory and staying here to live and work is continuing to dwindle. There are now fewer than 4,000 residents, and this year, just 8 babies are expected to be born. For those who grow up here, St. Helena is an idyll. It's almost, but not quite, impossible to reach. 1 flight a week in and out, a private sailing expedition lasting weeks, or an expensive berth on a cruise ship to snatch an hour or two in the fairy tale sounding locations. Two-gun saddle, alarm forest, the gates of chaos. The landscape and terrain are terrifying and terrific in equal measure. Sheer drops and sharp rocks bite into the ocean. The gooey middle is lusciously green, home to plants and trees found nowhere else on this planet. There is a more simple life here. Pleasures are found in the anticipation of fruit and vegetables arriving on the monthly ship. The playful scurry between shops named after taverns, such as the Star and the Rose and Crown, to find the best produce. For the very young, the island is a playground. Children swim and run without curfew or anxious parents looking on. But as the young become adults, many leave to find work. Ascension and the Falkland Islands are favourites, providing steady opportunity and better wages than the £4.50 minimum here. The UK and South Africa cool too, enticing the brightest to leave, for who knows how long. It's not just the young. Among those leaving is Amelia, who has been working at the courthouse in the capital, Jamestown. We met as she was locking up, the cases complete for the day. She paused and looked back at the white building with two cannons standing outside as ornamental guards. It was her last shift, and she had a leaving party to get to. She has packed up her home and will fly to Ascension for a new job lasting at least 2 years. It's better money, with more training opportunities, and many other friends and family are already there. It's very worrying, Amelia says of the declining number of saints, people born and bred on the island and staying to live. Everyone is leaving. These departures, often with heavy hearts, are not unusual. But in years gone by, just fathers would have left to seek their fortune. Now, whole families depart together. The government is currently amalgamating 3 primary schools into 2. Previously, there were 6. I don't want to frighten people, the bishop said in his radio address, remarking on this year's number of newborns. But where will those 8 babies be in 5 years? What will they be doing in 20 when it comes to jobs? It is a question Peter has been asking himself with frustration. In his 60s, he's come from his farm into Jamestown to the hotel he used to manage, the Consulate. Once the hub of the town, its golden era is now the stuff of legend. The place is a character in its own right. Its dining room is made from the wreck of a ship. The wooden floors of the ballroom marked by the ladies' heels from fancy dinners and dances of years gone by. But it's closed. For good. Now it's a time capsule, with half-full decanters of liquor in the rooms and stacks of the Sentinel newspaper in the library. The number of guests dwindled, the jobs disappeared, and the locals moved on. Peter worries the rest of the island could follow. As victorious election candidates celebrated being voted on to the island's council, they were well aware of the challenges ahead. They know the island's weak points, and now they have the power to nourish and nurture it. Amelia from the courthouse has a daughter, Selina. She finished studying at the island's only secondary school just a few years ago. She has been working with environmental scientists here and studying the subject at night, working towards a degree. The island's beauty and wildlife have inspired her, but, like her mum, it's made her want to travel overseas. But she still has St. Helena in her heart. Give me 2 terms, Selina says of the political timetable, and then maybe I'll come back, and maybe I'll run for office.
Beth Rose.
I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig from the Global Jigsaw podcast from the BBC, where we explore President Putin's idea of what it is to be Russian. It's packed up in one expression that's become the catchphrase of the moment, the Russian cultural code. We ask, what does it mean? The Global Jigsaw looks at the world through the lens of its media. Find us wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello, it's Ray Winstone. I'm here to tell you about my podcast on BBC Radio 4, History's Toughest Heroes. I've got stories about the pioneers, the rebels, the outcasts who define tough.
And that was the first time that anybody ever ran a car up that fast with no tires on. It almost feels like your eyeballs are going to come out of your head.
Tough enough for you? Subscribe to History's Toughest Heroes wherever you get your podcast.
Next to Uzbekistan, which is making art and culture a central pillar of its economic development. The Central Asian Republic was under Moscow's thumb for almost 2 centuries, first as part of the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union. From independence in the 90s until 2016, Uzbekistan remained closed under the strict authoritarian leadership of Islam Karimov. But now there are efforts to open up, as the country tries to rebrand itself through its creative industries. Kirsty Lang went to the Uzbek city of Bukhara for its latest biennial exhibition.
As an arts journalist, I've been to quite a few biennials over the years, but never one quite like this. Let's start with the audience, many of whom are under 10. Instead of the usual hipster art crowd, the exhibition spaces are full of seemingly ordinary Uzbek families manoeuvring pushchairs through the narrow streets of this ancient city, once a famous trading post between East and West along the Silk Road. Today, it's a young country. 60% of the population is under 30, and they'll need jobs in the future. The Uzbek government is hoping that investing in culture will provide economic returns, and they won't be the first. South Korea embarked on this strategy in the 90s. The Saudis and the Gulf states are also investing heavily in culture. The centre of Old Bukhara has been pedestrianised in preparation for the biennial. But instead of temporary pavilions or white cube galleries, the artworks are displayed inside newly restored historic buildings, like former mosques, madrasas and caravanserai. Those are inns that once provided accommodation and stables for the merchants on the Silk Route. All of them are built in distinctive adobe mud bricks, including Magokia Turi, which was built originally as a Zoroastrian temple, then it became a mosque, then a synagogue, and latterly a Soviet carpet museum. All 70 works are collaborations between a contemporary artist and an Uzbek working in one of the traditional crafts, such as weaving, embroidery and ceramics. The British sculptor Anthony Gormley partnered with a Bukharan master builder and restorer Timur Jumayev to create a labyrinth made from large slabs of mud brick. Gormley jokes that when they first met he asked Timur where he gets his materials from, and the Uzbek laughed and pointed at the ground they were standing on. Next to Gormley's installation is a pyramid made of jute, mud and sand by the Colombian artist Delcy Morelos, which envelops you in a cloud of cardamom, cinnamon, cloves and turmeric when you enter. She collaborated with a local spice merchant. But these partnerships aren't always easy. The Rakimovs, a father and son from a family of traditional ceramicists going back 7 generations, were paired with a cutting-edge art duo from Lithuania called Pakui Hardware, who couldn't be more different. They make high-tech conceptual art. Their inspiration was Ibn Sina, known as Avicenna in the West, a preeminent 10th century polymath from Bukhara known as the father of modern medicine because he recognised the link between mind and body. The resulting artwork, entitled Black Bile, consists of 2 huge black ceramic vessels in the shape of gallbladders hanging like fruit from steel pipes. Visitors are asked to whisper their woes into one vessel while the other plays a soothing sound piece. How did it go with the Lithuanians? I asked the 50-year-old father when I visit their studio in Tashkent. Not easy, he says bluntly. We took 5 months to agree on a project. But he reluctantly admitted that his 23-year-old son enjoyed the process more than he had, which I guess is the point. Gayani Umarova, who's in charge of Uzbekistan's art and culture program, is herself a product of the multi-ethnic former Soviet Union. She's married to a prominent Uzbek businessman. Her father's side of the family are Crimean Tatar, her mother's Armenian, and she speaks Russian, Uzbek and English, thanks to a stint at a British boarding school. I catch up with her in the courtyard of an old Silk Road trading post as we desperately seek shade from the beating midday sun. For centuries, Bukhara was a place of exchange, she says, not just for goods, but ideas, and I want it to become that once again. Her long-term plan is to create a new middle class of Uzbek creatives who will stay and build their country rather than emigrate abroad. But for that, she says, Uzbekistan needs to build a cultural ecosystem and infrastructure of museums, galleries and production companies to provide them with interesting careers, and that'll take time. One of my favourite moments in Bukhara was watching 3 small boys pointing and giggling in front of a satirical animation made by a group of Uzbek video artists. In it, a fat merchant in traditional costume is seen riding backwards on a cartoon donkey, before it cuts to 3 Uzbek women in designer tracksuits getting out of a Mercedes convertible while singing the praises of Louis Vuitton. This is the Silk Road reimagined for a new generation.
Kirsty Lang. And finally, with their pleated skirts, fringe shawls and bowler hats, the Cholita, mainly indigenous women, are a common sight in Bolivia's capital, La Paz. The word chola, which morphed into the diminutive cholita, was once a derogatory term for someone of mixed Spanish and indigenous heritage. But now many women are reclaiming the title and transforming from outcasts to icons in the process. Jane Chambers went to find out more.
I'm being ushered into a busy TV studio to watch a cooking show. This is one of our most popular programs, Inés Quispe Tecona whispers to me. We watch for a few minutes while 2 TV presenters wearing blue pleated skirts and matching blouses laugh and smile at the camera while they deftly prepare a picante de pollo, chicken served in a spicy tomato-based sauce with peas. Inés is one of a group of Cholita women working for RTP TV station. She takes me outside to the balcony, which has a spectacular view of La Paz, surrounded by snow-capped mountains. We're in El Alto, which at more than 4,000 metres is the highest city in the world. It's full of red brick buildings and street markets, where vendors try to sell you everything from oranges to knock-off designer trainers. Many Cholitas migrate here from the countryside. Inés comes from a small village. She started off in community radio and studied journalism at university. It wasn't easy, she tells me. There were just 2 of us Cholitas in the class, and other students mocked us by asking about our ice cream selling boyfriends. There's this stereotype that Cholitas are poor and uneducated, and that all we deserve is to go out with people in low-grade jobs, she explains. Of course there's nothing wrong with selling ice cream, but we get to have a choice about what we do. Inés is proud of her heritage. Her grandmother, mother and sisters are all mujeres de la pollera, which means they wear the traditional pleated skirts, shawls and hats. In the past, many women gave up wearing these kind of clothes because they were fed up with being discriminated against. But that's changing, she says. Every year in La Paz there's a celebration called Gran Poder. It's a huge festival blending indigenous and Catholic traditions. We Cholitas love to dance, and this is where we go to have fun and show off our fashion, she says enthusiastically. Women spend thousands of dollars on their jewellery and costumes, Inés continues. For decades, Cholita women were dismissed by many Bolivians as somehow being inferior and uneducated, only good for jobs like cleaning people's houses and looking after their employers' children. That cliché is changing. Inés points to Cholitas who are lawyers and politicians. At weekends, she works as a master of ceremonies at weddings and baptisms for Cholita women from powerful Aymaran families living in El Alto. The price of gold keeps going up, and these women are in another league. There's so much gold on display, she tells me. They're very good at business. It's a myth that all Cholitas are poor. Some of the most famous Cholitas in Bolivia are the Cholitas Escaladoras, the Cholita climbers. I accompany one of them high up in the Andes foothills above El Alto. I'm finding it hard to breathe. There's less oxygen at 4,500 metres above sea level, and Lydia Guayas is telling me to take deep breaths. Lydia loves the mountains. She started out as a cook at base camp for her husband. He's a tourist guide and brings groups here. They always looked so happy when they came down from the mountains, and I longed to go where they went, she tells me wistfully. Eventually, she borrowed an old helmet and some boots, and her husband agreed to teach her and some other Cholitas how to walk on the snow and use crampons. It was tough at first because they kept getting caught in my skirt, but I was determined to climb, wearing my skirt to show what we Cholita women can do. After shortening and narrowing the skirts, things got easier. These days, Lydia also works as a mountain guide alongside her husband. She and her friends have climbed some of the highest peaks in Bolivia and Argentina, and now she has her sights set on somewhere even higher. My dream's to climb Everest, she tells me with a grin. I've been training to go as high as I can, and some doctors did some tests on me last week and say despite my age, she's in her late 50s, I'm fit and well and can function really well at high altitudes. She must have noticed the scepticism on my face. Why not? She laughs. I have to make it, because we Cholitas are powerful, and we've shown here in Bolivia what we can do. She's right. Who am I to doubt her? I hope she makes it.
Jane Chambers, and that's all for today. We'll be back again next Saturday morning. Please join us then.
Hello, it's Ray Winstone. I'm here to tell you about my podcast on BBC Radio 4, History's Toughest Heroes. I've got stories about the pioneers, the rebels, the outcasts who define tough.
And that was the first time that anybody ever ran a car up that fast with no tires on. It almost feels like your eyeballs are going to come out of your head.
Tough enough for you? Subscribe to History's Toughest Heroes on BBC Sounds.
I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig from the Global Jigsaw podcast from the BBC, where we explore President Putin's idea of what it is to be Russian. It's packed up in one expression that's become the catchphrase of the moment, the Russian cultural code. We ask, what does it mean? The Global Jigsaw looks at the world through the lens of its media. Find us wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello, it's Ray Winstone. I'm here to tell you about my podcast on BBC Radio 4, History's Toughest Heroes. I've got stories about the pioneers, the rebels, the outcasts who define tough.
And that was the first time that anybody ever ran a car up that fast with no tires on. It almost feels like your eyeballs are going to come out of your head.
Tough enough for you? Subscribe to History's Toughest Heroes wherever you get your podcast.
This BBC podcast is supported by ads outside the UK.
I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig from the Global Jigsaw podcast from the BBC, where we explore President Putin's idea of what it is to be Russian. It's packed up in one expression that's become the catchphrase of the moment, the Russian cultural code. We ask, what does it mean? The Global Jigsaw looks at the world through the lens of its media. Find us wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello, it's Ray Winstone. I'm here to tell you about my podcast on BBC Radio 4, History's Toughest Heroes. I've got stories about the pioneers, the rebels, the outcasts who define tough.
And that was the first time that anybody ever ran a car up that fast with no tires on. It almost feels like your eyeballs are going to come out of your head.
Tough enough for you? Subscribe to History's Toughest Heroes wherever you get your podcast.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello. Today we travel in a plane stuffed with supplies, motorbikes, pets and military personnel to reach a small island at the heart of a dispute between China and the Philippines. We meet a priest in Ukraine who remains spiritually torn after the country's Orthodox Church cut ties with its Russian counterpart. In Arizona, we sample a traditional stew with the Hopi people as part of a new initiative to share their customs and culture. And we're in Angola, where, amid the burning daytime heat, our correspondent takes refuge in a curious underground museum. But first, the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, which has waged a 40-year insurgency against Turkey, announced this month that it will disarm and disband. More than 40,000 people were killed during its fight for an independent Kurdish state, which was one of the world's longest-running conflicts. The PKK, which is classed as a terrorist organisation by Turkey, the UK, the EU and the US, now says the Kurdish issue can be solved by democratic politics. But what is the feeling in the Kurdish heartland in southeastern Turkey? Our correspondent Ola Gerin has been to the city of Diyarbakir.
Hours after the PKK announced it was putting down its weapons, storm clouds rolled in over the ancient city of Diyarbakir, and the heavens opened. As hailstones lashed the streets, we ran for cover, joining the regulars inside a simple cafe that looked untouched by time. They were mulling over the news, over glasses of black tea. There were doubts and questions, Had the PKK secured any concessions, and what would all this mean for Kurdish rights? Nejmettin, a 65-year-old driver, expected nothing good from the government. "They've been tricking us for thousands of years," he said vehemently. "I don't believe anything will change. It's all lies. They're cheating us." 80-year-old Mehmet, sitting nearby, had a very different view. "Anyone from any side who will stop the bloodshed, I salute them," he said, tipping the top of his flat cap. "This conflict is brother on brother. Everyone who dies is ours, whether Turkish or Kurdish. I wish this had happened 10 years ago." Back then, in 2015, just opposite the cafe, the Turkish army and Kurdish militants were doing battle in the narrow alleyways, and a 20-something called Falat was in the mountains fighting for the PKK. He had abandoned college and his studies in agricultural engineering. His sister, Musina, says he was tired of injustice and believed that as a Kurd he would always be a second-class citizen. Musina is a slight figure in a floral dress, and at 45 she looks careworn. She sees her brother every time she opens her phone. His face is her screensaver. Falat was killed in a Turkish airstrike in 2018. "I was walking tall," she tells me, "because he sacrificed his life for peace and democracy, but it was cutting me to the bone. I would lock myself away in my room at night and cry my eyes out until morning." Falat is one of 10 members of her extended family who joined the PKK and were killed. She calls them martyrs. Turkey calls them terrorists. Musina, a mother of 3, wants a different future for the next generation. "I hope our young people will stay alive," she says, "and won't suffer as we did. The price that has been paid was for a better life for our children. God willing, it will come." Like many here, she says the PKK leader, Abdullah Öcalan, must now be freed. He's been in solitary confinement since 1999 in an island prison off the coast of Istanbul. There will be no justice, she says, if Apo is kept inside. That's Kurdish for uncle. Having founded the PKK in 1978, Öcalan himself called for it to disband, saying democracy is now the only way. The reality is the armed way didn't work, and the PKK and its affiliates have been hit hard by the Turkish military in recent years, including in neighbouring Iraq and Syria. Will Öcalan be freed? And what about the Kurdish politicians, journalists and activists who remain behind bars? Human rights groups say many have been jailed on bogus terrorism charges. For decades, Turkey refused to even recognise the existence of its Kurdish minority, who make up around 20% of the population, calling them Mountain Turks. One local woman recalls her father burying a cassette tape of Kurdish songs in their garden in the 1990s, fearing a police raid. In those years, she says, just speaking Kurdish could be grounds for beatings and torture. Fast forward to today, and she says the mood is hopeful but cautious as people wait for the state to make the next move. Publicly at least, the Turkish government has promised nothing in return for the PKK ending its long war. But changes are expected after the militants disarm. There may be an amnesty or exile for some fighters. One Kurdish analyst here says once the guns are gone, Kurds will have a bigger place in Turkish politics, and that is a real gain. For President Erdogan, there is also a gain. He needs the support of pro-Kurdish parties in parliament if he's to be able to run for a third term. In the shade of the towering city walls, which have guarded Diyarbakir since Roman times, we drank more tea and heard more views. The last word goes to Ibrahim, who is 63, and was sitting on a small stool in the grass, prayer beads in hand. No one has achieved anything, he said with sadness. There is nothing but harm and loss on this side and on the other. There are no winners.
Ola Guerin. Now to the South China Sea and the ongoing territorial dispute between the Philippines and China. For the past 10 years, China has been expanding its presence in the region, building air bases on coral reefs and deploying hundreds of ships to reinforce its claim to almost all of the strategic sea lanes running south from China's ports. The Philippines is one of the few Southeast Asian nations daring to push back on China's advance, holding the line over strategically important territories, such as the tiny island of Pagasa. Jonathan Head recently gained rare access to the island.
As we banked steeply over Pagasa, the island seemed impossibly small. The runway stuck out on either side of it, like a ruler placed over the sparkling turquoise sea. Recently resurfaced with concrete and extended, I'd read it was 1,300 metres long. The big transport plane we were on could, according to my hurried research, land on just 1,000 metres, but only if not fully loaded. Our aircraft looked very full. So full, in fact, that the dozens of Filipino soldiers travelling with us had to stand all the way. But much of the fuselage was filled with mattresses piled up to the ceiling and trays of eggs. Perhaps it wasn't that heavy. Anyway, the pilot pulled the plane to a shuddering stop, and no one got their feet wet. As we came in, you couldn't miss the armada of ships lying just offshore, all of them Chinese. I identified the distinctive white outline of a Coast Guard vessel. I could read the number 5103, which I knew had been harassing Filipino boats around the reefs and quays near Pagasa. The others were from the so-called maritime militia, large fishing ships repurposed to enforce China's expansive territorial claims. Theirs is a permanent, intimidating presence. We had just a couple of hours on the island, but as it takes no more than 30 minutes to walk the whole way around it, that was enough. Once you move off the airport apron, you are suddenly in a drowsy tropical idyll. Around 300 people live on Pagasa in wooden houses built close together on the sandy east side of the island. In the fierce midday heat, most were taking a siesta. The only sounds were a young man strumming his guitar, a gaggle of ducks, and the waves lapping against a brilliant white beach. Anywhere else in Southeast Asia, and you would surely have found several tourist resorts. But Pagasa is a remote, frontline island, and standing next to his little wooden catamaran, Larry Hugo is a living witness to that. Deeply bronzed by a lifetime of fishing, he's been living on the island for 16 years and has been chronicling the steady build-up of China's presence. He watched and filmed as China constructed a full-size military airbase on Subi Reef, less than 30 kilometres away. More recently, he became a minor celebrity when his video of a Chinese ship trying to ram his boat went viral. But the almost constant Chinese pressure has forced him to retreat from the fishing grounds he used to work to the waters close to Pagasa. And he says fish stocks there are much smaller. It's really hard work for him to fill his tubs now. And fishing is pretty much all you can do unless you have a government job. Yet I met no one on the island who wanted to leave. In part, it was the clean and healthy environment. Our kids play basketball, go swimming and snorkelling after school, said Raylene Limbo, who's been teaching on the island for 10 years. Who needs shopping malls? The support they get from the Philippines government is another incentive to stay. Every family gets a sack of rice, cooking oil and other supplies each month, subsidised electricity and low rents. And as health worker Melania Alejado told me, as there's nothing to spend your money on, it's easy to save. The first Filipino to try to occupy Pagasa was an eccentric lawyer called Thomas Clomer. He declared an independent republic of freedom land in the seas around it in the 1950s, before he was chased off by forces from Taiwan, which also claims the area. But when the Taiwanese garrison briefly abandoned Pagasa during a typhoon in 1971, Filipino soldiers seized their chance and grabbed it. They have never left. The island is now part of a Philippines municipality called Kalayaan, or Freedom. Despite being disputed territory, Kalayaan took part in the recent Philippines elections, with 4 candidates contesting the posts of mayor and vice mayor. Which is all well and good, but from the end of the runway we could still see all those Chinese ships filling the horizon. Swarms, the Filipinos call them, and they can literally swamp any kind of vessel which challenges their dominance of these seas. There's little doubt they could drive the Philippines out if they wanted to. Pagasa matters because it is a proper island, not a reef or partially submerged cay, typical of what you find in the South China Sea. Under international law, it gets its own 12 nautical mile territorial waters. And as the Philippines has learnt from China, possession is what counts in pursuing claims here. So it's determined to hold on to this faraway sliver of land for as long as it can.
Jonathan Head. Conflicts are often characterised through the prism of a battle between 2 clear sides, but the reality is often much more complex. Hostilities and mixed loyalties can pervade communities and create mistrust between neighbours, families and faith communities too. Such social schisms have been evident in Ukraine, united for centuries with Russia through the Orthodox Church, before Ukraine's church officially split. For some Ukrainian priests and parishioners, this spiritual rift has proven difficult to reconcile, even in the face of Russia's full-scale invasion. As Nick Sturdy discovered,
the congregation was filing out of Father Mykola's house in the village of Ostroviets in western Ukraine. He had just held the Sunday service in his crowded living room, icons and candles nestled amid the cupboards and chairs, the smell of incense still in the air. This was back in 2018, and Father Mykola had recently been shut out of the village's Church of St. George the Victorious, his parish for 35 years, because, like many other priests in Ukraine, he had decided to remain a priest of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, then still formally tied to the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow. The evening before, Father Mykola had taken us to his beloved parish, now padlocked and beyond his reach. The building had been taken over by priests of the newly established Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and local politicians had been involved, Father Mykola had told me. Mykola's wife, Halina, said that in her parish the priests had come with the heavies, though I understand such incidents were not widespread. They were big guys, and we were frightened, she told me. She said that they told her, we need to kick out the Moskal, a pejorative term for Russians, though Father Mykola, his wife Halina, and the local congregation are Ukrainian. On the porch of their home, Halina, a nurse and midwife here for over 20 years, held a picture of her son in his Ukrainian army fatigues. He had fought in the east of the country after Russia first launched its military intervention into Ukraine in 2014. When he came back, something had happened to his mind. It took him a year to return to normal life, she told me. Yaki my varahi? What kind of enemies are we? Asked Halina in Ukrainian, tears and hurt in her eyes, anguish on her tired, thin face. The historic ties between Father Mykola's church and Moscow meant that the Russian Orthodox Church and its head Patriarch Kirill wielded substantial influence, and priests were obliged to pray for Patriarch Kirill at every Sunday service. Ties that were viewed with deep suspicion by many in a country already defending itself from the Russian army. But did that mean that Father Mykola's church or its congregation were pro-Russian or anti-Ukrainian? How can you say that? We love Ukraine, an elderly parishioner proudly told us, her white hair wrapped in a traditional flowery headscarf, her gold teeth glinting in the midday sun. I was born into this faith, I was baptized in this faith, and I want to die in this faith. After Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, Patriarch Kirill's support of President Putin's war became more vocal, and a regular spectacle of the war is the sight of his priests in Russia blessing weapons and soldiers deployed to fight Ukrainians, often fellow Orthodox believers, Father Mykola and Halina's son included. Since 2018, major changes have been made within the old Ukrainian church. It's discarded Moscow's role and patronage and has publicly criticised the Russian invasion and the pro-war stance of Patriarch Kirill, who is no longer prayed for on Sundays. But for Ukraine's politicians, these changes are too little, too late. Last October, a new law made any activity of the 10,000 parishes of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church potentially unlawful if ties are found with the Russian Orthodox Church, something subject to a formal 9-month investigation and categorically denied by Father Mikola. Organisations such as Human Rights Watch have criticised the law as interfering with Ukrainians' right to freedom of religion. I've been back in touch with Father Mikola in recent weeks. He no longer holds services for parishioners in his home, he told me, following warnings from local officials, he says. His parishioners now say their prayers and light their candles in their own homes, in private, but none of them are planning to move over to the state's favoured Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Father Mikola says, explaining there are canonical rather than political differences. Mikola and Halina's son is now back in military fatigues and on the front line, along with his younger brother. One of them is fighting against the Russians in the Donbass, the other near Kharkiv. Do you still feel you are viewed as enemies? I ask Father Mikola. Not by the community, he replies. It's just local officials who say we're enemies, people with sons who aren't in the Ukrainian army. I'm just a pensioner these days, and I hold services for myself. It's God's will.
Nick Sturdy.
I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig from the Global Jigsaw podcast from the BBC, where we explore President Putin's idea of what it is to be Russian. It's packed up in one expression that's become the catchphrase of the moment, the Russian cultural code. We ask, what does it mean? The Global Jigsaw looks at the world through the lens of its media. Find us wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello, it's Ray Winstone. I'm here to tell you about my podcast on BBC Radio 4, History's Toughest Heroes. I've got stories about the pioneers, the rebels, the outcasts who define tough.
And that was the first time that anybody ever ran a car up that fast with no tires on. It almost feels like your eyeballs are going to come out of your head.
Tough enough for you? Subscribe to History's Toughest Heroes wherever you get your podcast.
Next, we're in Arizona, home to 3 major Native American tribes, the Navajo, the Hopi, and the Apache nations. Historically, there have been tensions between these groups with long-standing disputes over land, but they also have a shared history of forced removal, oppression, and discrimination. Today, tribal leaders have decided to work together to build bridges between Native American communities and with non-Indigenous Americans too. Stephanie Theobald has been hearing about their plans.
Living in the United States, you find yourself constantly dodging culinary bullets. How much GMO is in your dinner? How much high fructose corn syrup? But here in a house high up on a mesa, on the Hopi Reservation, the traditional hominy and lamb stew, nuquivi, has a long and pristine heritage. No additives or preservatives here. The Hopi people are famed for their ancient farming methods. They tend to their beans and corn, like other US citizens cherish their cars. Corn has a central role in their creation myth. The Hopi believed they emerged from underground and finally arrived at this world where the Creator gave them an ear of blue corn, telling them that they were to be the stewards of the land. If they looked after the land, it would take care of them. I'm on a whistle-stop tour of the indigenous lands of Arizona with Tony and his colleague Antonio. Tony Skralunas is head of commerce for the Navajo Nation, the largest US tribe with some 400,000 members. They're the founders of a new non-profit organization called Red Road Journey. Their current project is to found an intertribal healing center for Native American elders, and while they are healing from some of the past damage inflicted by colonizers such as broken treaties and enforced boarding schools, they say they will be sharing their knowledge with guests, some of whom will be non-native. Their plan is ambitious. Some communities believe that tradition should stay within the tribe, while non-tribal liberals worry about cultural appropriation. But Tony's colleague and co-founder, Antonio Romero, underlines that building bridges is crucial right now. Humanity is looking for sustainable solutions for the environment, and Native Americans have lived in balance with Mother Earth for centuries. We've come to a point where some of our secrets, if you like, can be shared. After my lamb stew, Gwen, the mother of the Hopi household with whom I'm feasting, offers me a plate of somoviki, or sweet blue corn dumplings wrapped in corn husk. The feast day we're celebrating is the home dance, a sacred Hopi ritual to invoke rain for the next corn crop. It's an astonishing spectacle. A circle of men, painted blue, wearing feathers and painted masks with snouts and draped with juniper branches, walk and chant in a circle to a backdrop of drums. For the Hopi, these are not men, they are kachina, or spirit beings. Photography is forbidden, which adds a thrill. And then the biggest thrill happens. Rain actually starts falling from the hot sky. The healing centre is still at the planning stages, but the idea is that tribal elders there will reconnect with their old ways, how to touch the soil, communicate with water, relate to horses. Young tribe members are integral. Antonio is still in his early 30s. He used to work on Wall Street, but one day, during a job interview, he found he couldn't speak. I knew the answers, but they stuck in my throat. I realised I no longer believed in an economic system based on competition and hoarding resources. He embarked on what he calls a spiritual homecoming. Tony and Antonio are launching a series of showcase days where Red Road Journey's knowledge keepers will demonstrate their skills. I meet Kyle Sumutskuku, a Hopi endurance runner who trains on his breathtaking mesa over 1,700 metres above sea level. His workshops will explain how running is a form of meditation for the Hopi. Tradition helps me feel connected to the world, the serene 28-year-old explains. When I contribute to my culture, I help not just Hopi people, but all living beings. I later joked to Antonio that his knowledge keepers make me think of Buffalo Bill. That showman toured his Wild West show in the 1890s with more than 100 Native Americans, including Geronimo and Sitting Bull. The show thrilled audiences, yet enshrined a simplified colonial account of Indians as exciting savages. Antonio smiles. We're taking the power back, he notes. We're finally getting to tell our own stories.
Stephanie Theobald. And finally, towards the end of Joe Biden's presidency, he paid an official visit to Angola, the first time a sitting US president had been to sub-Saharan Africa in 10 years. The trip laid bare the waning influence of the US in the region, with China and India now the country's biggest trading partners. And money has been on the mind of Angola's president, João Lourenço. He's been spearheading an anti-corruption clampdown, which has recovered billions of dollars stolen from state coffers. Rob Crossan was in the capital Luanda recently, where an unexpected detour into a curious museum led to a lesson on the country's money matters.
Angola's National Currency Museum, in the capital Luanda, is appropriately vault-like, impossible to see from the street. To get in, you descend deep stairs, which plunge underneath a city square facing the waterfront where the spume-frothed Atlantic licks at vanilla-yellow sands. Despite the scorching heat outside, all is cool inside the museum, home to myriad displays focused on the kwanza, the national currency since Angola broke free of Portuguese colonial rule in 1975. What followed was one of the longest and most intractable civil wars on the continent, drawing in troops from Cuba, the Soviet Union, and apartheid-era South Africa. The war ended nearly 25 years ago, and since then the capital's infrastructure has largely been neglected, beyond the shimmering skyscrapers and beachside bars that line the showpiece lagoon-side promenade. Angolan governments have had plenty to spend. The country's oil and diamonds brought in huge revenues, though few ordinary people feel the benefits. But Angola's current government has been pursuing someone who they believe to have been one of the country's leading embezzlers of wealth. Currently based in Dubai, Isabel dos Santos is the former first daughter of the country. She is reputed to be Africa's first female billionaire and, before some of her assets were frozen in 2021, the continent's richest woman. Her father, José Eduardo dos Santos, ruled Angola through the war years and parachuted his daughter in as the head of the state oil company Sonangol. State prosecutors claim Isabel, quote, systemically abused her position at state-run companies to embezzle at least £350 million, depriving Angola of resources and funding for much-needed development. Dos Santos denies any wrongdoing and claims she is a victim of a campaign of oppression by Angola. She has not returned to Angola since these accusations were levelled against her in 2021, even missing her father's funeral. All this drama seems a world away from the calm, air-conditioned, windowless bunker of the Currency Museum. In here, most things are reassuringly dull. The self-aggrandizing displays of giant coins and frayed banknotes of yore can't compete with the powerful air conditioning when it comes to finding a reason to linger. Angola's wealth is not well distributed, my guide Martial tells me as we shuffle round the room. Eduardo dos Santos treated the country like his kingdom. Reconstruction of the country can only happen by completely restarting everything and stopping the stealing, he goes on. In the next 15 years, if the current government continues like it is, then the country will improve. Roads are already better, so it's a start. After 10 minutes of wandering around the deserted museum, I prepare myself to do battle with the fierce Angolan sunshine again when I notice a TV screen. Stepping in front of it, I find it is a camera where I can have my face superimposed onto a kwanzaa, taking the place of the first post-independence president, Agostinho Neto, who still appears on every banknote. I give my best basilisk stare as the flash goes off. I'm then asked to type in my email address, with the promise that an image of my own personalised kwanzaa with me as president will be sent immediately at no charge. Well, it's been a month now and I'm still waiting for my kwanzaa to appear. And yes, I promise I did check my junk mail folder. What went wrong, I wondered? Just an IT glitch? Or was this a rather underhand way for the state-run museum to get a mugshot of me? Either way, my missing kwanzaa, worthless though it may be, seems to be something of a metaphor for Angola at the present time. While the corporate jets continue to swoop in and out of Luanda's new Chinese-built airport, and the battle for the millions allegedly stolen from Sonangol rumbles on, a regular question on the lips of many Angolans is, where has all the money gone?
Rob Crossan, and that's all for today. We'll be back again next Saturday morning. Do join us.
Who's in the news for all the wrong reasons? Step inside the world of crisis management and so-called spin doctors with me, David Yelland.
And me, Simon Lewis. In our podcast from BBC Radio 4, we tell you what's really going on behind the scenes as the week's biggest PR disasters unfold.
Simon and I used to be on opposite sides of a story in the media when I was editor of The Sun and Simon was communications secretary to the late Queen. Now we've teamed up to share everything we know about what's keeping those big stories in and out of the press.
As the great philosopher king Mike Tyson himself once said, everyone has a plan until they're punched in the mouth.
And there's a lot of people punching people in the mouth in this town.
Listen and subscribe to When It Hits the Fan on BBC Sounds.
I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig from the Global Jigsaw podcast from the BBC, where we explore President Putin's idea of what it is to be Russian. It's packed up in one expression that's become the catchphrase of the moment, the Russian cultural code. We ask, what does it mean? The Global Jigsaw looks at the world through the lens of its media. Find us wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello, it's Ray Winstone. I'm here to tell you about my podcast on BBC Radio 4, History's Toughest Heroes. I've got stories about the pioneers, the rebels, the outcasts who define tough.
And that was the first time that anybody ever ran a car up that fast with no tires on. It almost feels like your eyeballs are going to come out of your head.
Tough enough for you? Subscribe to History's Toughest Heroes wherever you get your podcast.
This BBC podcast is supported by ads outside the UK.
I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig from the Global Jigsaw podcast from the BBC, where we explore President Putin's idea of what it is to be Russian. It's packed up in one expression that's become the catchphrase of the moment, the Russian cultural code. We ask, what does it mean? The Global Jigsaw looks at the world through the lens of its media. Find us wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello, it's Ray Winstone. I'm here to tell you about my podcast on BBC Radio 4, History's Toughest Heroes. I've got stories about the pioneers, the rebels, the outcasts who define tough.
And that was the first time that anybody ever ran a car up that fast with no tires on. It almost feels like your eyeballs are going to come out of your head.
Tough enough for you? Subscribe to History's Toughest Heroes wherever you get your podcast.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello. Today we have a report from the front line in Ukraine. Denmark summons the US top diplomat over reported attempts to influence Greenlanders on their future. We're in the capital, Nuuk, to hear what the locals are saying. In the US state of Florida, we traverse through alligator-infested swamps to visit a hastily built detention center in Donald Trump's immigration crackdown. And finally, we're in the German state of Thuringia, now a stronghold of the far-right AfD party, at a cultural festival in Weimar that's pushing against the tide. First, while the world seeks a path to peace, Russia responds with missiles. So said the EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, following a week in which Russia made slow but steady advances in the Donbass in the country's east. Donbass is the resource-rich greater region made up of Donetsk and Luhansk and has long been in Moscow's sights. Vladimir Putin has reportedly said he'll freeze the war in return for full control of Donetsk. It currently controls 70% and nearly all of Luhansk. It's believed Russia has over 100,000 troops now standing by, waiting to exploit another opportunity around Dobropilya. In a stark reminder of Russia's unrelenting advance, the capital Kiev has also sustained heavy missile bombardment in recent days, in which more than 20 were killed and still rising, and several homes destroyed. The city's mayor declared a day of mourning on Friday following the attacks. Quentin Somerville has been in the country's east following the Russian advance in Donbass and the evacuation effort underway.
Sometimes in this job, it's the people standing on the sidelines who can tell you as much about a situation as those in the thick of it. In a Ukrainian army field hospital in the dead of night in Donbass, not far from the front line, I watched as casualty after casualty was rushed in, torn and bloodied from the battlefield. The soldier on the gurney was disoriented, but conscious when he came in. In a sterile room under the brightest of lights, they cut away his filthy uniform. A nearby doctor scribbled in his log, 37 years of age, gunshot, shrapnel wounds to the right arm and leg, possible abdominal cavity involvement, perforation of right eardrum. The patient was put under. They set to work on him, cleaning, extracting, stitching, patching. He's wrapped in a thermal blanket, placed on a stretcher and sent to the main hospital for further care. 35 minutes and the job is done. He'll live. I noticed dirt on his and other soldiers' bandages and tourniquets. There was nothing fresh about them. For how long had these men had to wait, bleeding and in shock in mud-filled trenches and dugouts, to get the care they needed to save their lives, I wondered. Standing outside in the corridor was a sergeant from the combat medical platoon who had rescued the man on the table. Ramrod straight and with a neatly trimmed moustache, Ed is from Dnipro in a neighbouring region. He started by saying he couldn't tell me anything, and then proceeded to tell me much about the patient, the battlefield, and the state of the war in Ukraine. He didn't know the soldier personally, but he was one of 4 extracted from the front line. They're from our unit or neighbouring units, he said. We take everyone. All I can tell you is we went for these guys 3 times. Twice we couldn't get them off position, and today we finally reached them, he said wearily. It took 2 days to rescue the injured man, such as the ferocity of the fighting on Ukraine's eastern front, specifically around the town of Pokrovsk. For a year the Russians have been attacking the city. They now have it partially encircled. It's a key city, one of the most heavily defended on the Ukrainian front, a vital part of the country's fortress belt that protects Kharkiv and Dnipro regions and beyond. Small groups of Russian soldiers had infiltrated nearby defences around the town of Dobropilya, sparking fears that Ukrainian lines could be about to be breached. They've since been pushed back, but at great cost. "How's the fighting here?" I asked Ed. "Very difficult," he said, "very difficult," he repeated, shaking his head. "I've been fighting since 2022. The difference is significant," he said. "Drones have changed the war. It's very tough. Evacuation is generally problematic because medics and ambulances are priority targets for the Russians when evacuating the wounded. The fighting is intense and everything has become much harder now." The doctors in the hospital confirmed what he was saying. The casualty rates are very high. Ukraine doesn't allow journalists to report numbers of battlefield dead or wounded, unless released by military command, and it rarely reveals them. But in this one field hospital, they were in their dozens, daily. And it's the nature of the injuries that's concerning too. The surgeon in charge, Captain Andre, explained that he was seeing more bullet wounds, small arms fire as well. Around 20 to 25% of the wounded currently have bullet wounds, he said. But it's drones that are to blame for half of the injuries, especially FPV drones, or first-person view. Flown individually, they hunt down a single target. "Has it ever been this bad?" I asked Captain Andre. "This is currently one of the most intense periods in terms of severely wounded per day," he said, matter-of-factly. A man was wheeled past on a stretcher, just arrived in an ambulance. His right leg was gone. Ribbons of gore and flesh were about all that was left. FPV drone strike on the road from Pokrovsk, I was told. Pokrovsk is in Donetsk region, about a quarter of which is still under Ukrainian control. Along with neighbouring Luhansk, most of which the Russians have seized, the two regions make up the historic and resource-rich Donbass. It has been suggested that in the ongoing peace negotiations as part of a land swap deal, Russia would be prepared to freeze the current battle lines if Ukraine surrenders all of Donbass. Tens of thousands have died for it, and while its casualties are higher, Russia is still slowly gaining ground. "Has it been worth it?" I asked combat medic Sergeant Ed. Again, he didn't want to answer, but with a deep sigh, he continued, "I've been here since 2022. I'm very fed up with all of this. Tired, exhausted. Donbass itself no longer exists as such. You can see for yourselves." "But should it be surrendered?" I pressed. "I saw what happens when the Russian world comes here. I was in Borodianka. I saw it," he said, recalling the town near Kyiv where Russian atrocities were committed at the start of the war. "That's why I don't want this to happen somewhere else or reach me on the Dnipro. God forbid. That's why I'll stay here until the end." In the nearby frontline town of Dobropilya, civilians aren't staying. When Russia advances, civilians suffer. Most of them have been forced out already, but some are unable to leave. Attacks from the air come daily, and the place has been without water and mostly without electricity for over a week. I went into the town with volunteers from a charity, Universal Aid Ukraine, which is helping the last of the population escape, the sick, the old, and any remaining children. Lars, one of the volunteers, is 6'8" and dressed like he was going into battle. Full body armour, helmet, wraparound shades, and the rooftop of his armoured BMW, he's German, mushroomed with drone-jamming domes. On his hip he carried a pistol. It fired not bullets, but a net that entangles approaching drones. It would take nerves of steel to use such a weapon, especially when the instinct on hearing a drone overhead is to dive for cover, not to stand tall and face it. Lars and his team aren't lacking courage. On our second trip in that day, several Russian FPV drones were in the air. One appeared to be following our vehicles, so we took cover in nearby buildings. Lars's drone detector captured the video signal of the Russian drone operator. It was an eerie experience, watching it from the operator's perspective, flying towards us with its deadly payload, a rocket-propelled grenade hanging below just at the edge of the camera frame. Bombs began landing nearby, but still Lars was able to gather the evacuees and leave town at speed. Russia has killed at least 7 people in Dobropilya and injured 44 since mid-July. 3 were killed in the days I visited: a 52-year-old man, a a 73-year-old and a 20-year-old woman. I travelled from there to another town where a former kindergarten is serving as a transit centre for evacuees. There'd been a mix-up with our permissions, so I waited outside, alone in the garden in the sunshine, feeling ridiculous in my body armour and helmet as I balanced on a nursery-sized chair. I could hear a wood pigeon cooing in the pine tree above and the distant sound of artillery fire. Somewhere nearby, a drone flew overhead. An older man came out and pulled up another tiny chair, sat down, lit an unfiltered cigarette, and burst into tears. Ivan is 72 and had just been evacuated from Konstantinivka after Russia bombed the hospital where he was being treated. All the windows were blown out, everything, he said. He'd been admitted to the hospital after Russia earlier bombed his home and he received shrapnel to the hip. He wasn't crying for himself, but for his wife, Raisa. They've been married 50 years and now he didn't know where she was. It would be a great gift if you could bring her to me, he said, breaking down in tears again. There's nothing left of his village now, but when I asked him if he'd return, he stopped and looked at me. Definitely, he said. It's my homeland.
Quentin Somerville. Denmark this week summoned the top US envoy in Copenhagen over a report alleging that people connected to Donald Trump have been carrying out covert influence operations in Greenland. Greenland's status has been thrust into the spotlight after the US president has repeatedly said he wanted to annex the semi-autonomous nation for its strategic position and mineral wealth. And despite having broad self-government since 1979, Greenland's foreign and defence policy is made in Copenhagen. On an island of just over 55,000 people, where fishing is the primary source of income, independence for Greenland would mean either increasing tourism or allowing the mining of minerals like rare earth metals. Bob Howard has been to the capital, Nuuk, where he heard from people about their own hopes for the political and economic future.
The Mother of the Sea is a statue many Greenlanders can identify with. This voluptuous stone woman can be found on the rocks below the old colonial harbour in the island's capital, Nuuk, surrounded by a polar bear and various sea creatures. Most people here are of Inuit origin, and the Mother of the Sea represents how closely their well-being is connected with respecting nature. Up from the rocks is another statue, which some people are less enthusiastic about. It's of Hans Ehle, the first missionary who came here from the Kingdom of Denmark and Norway in 1721, marking the beginning of a long period of Danish colonisation. Akka Niviana, a local poet, actor and artist, says it may have been a mild colonisation compared to what happened in other parts of the world, but it was colonisation nevertheless. Akka has striking traditional Inuit tattoos on her face, from the bottom of her lip to her chin, and from the corner of her eyes to the tip of her ears, and she's wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with "Greenland is not for sale." It's in response to the Donald Trump supporters who came to Nuuk back in January and were spotted handing out $100 bills in a media stunt to promote the US president's appeal to buy, or even annex, the biggest island in the world. Akka says people were furious at the idea they could be bought. Greenland has been self-governing since 1979, but Denmark still has control of areas like defence and foreign policy. When I ask Akka if she thinks Greenland should push for complete independence, she is equivocal. Like many islanders, her heart says yes, but her head looks at the practical obstacles. The 55,000 plus people here depend on subsidies from Denmark to survive. These support industries like fishing, which makes up some 90% of the island's export income. That's not money which at the moment can be easily replaced. One option is to develop Greenland's tourism. A new airport has recently opened in the capital, and there are now direct flights from North America. 160,000 tourists came last year, but Greenland is still an expensive destination. Potentially more promising is mining. Bint Jensen is the managing director of a company which runs one of only 2 current working mines on the island. His mine extracts the mineral anorthosite, used to make products like fiberglass. Bint tells me that if you look at the critical materials needed by Europe and the US, a substantial portion on that list can be found in Greenland. But getting the necessary permits can be painful. It's like root canal treatment at the dentist, he tells me. A visit to the National Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland, which is based at the university on the outskirts of the capital, reveals other hurdles. Thomas Varming, the survey's chief consultant and leader of the office here in Nuuk, tells me that whilst the almost continuous daylight of the summer is an advantage for builders, the months of darkness in winter, combined with the very cold climate, mean it can be very challenging. Some 80% of Greenland is covered in ice. Thomas says it might take 3 years to build a small harbour here, where it would only take one in a more temperate part of the world. So, he says, investors have to wait longer to see any kind of return. Even if there are only currently 2 working mines on the island, the Minister for Business, Trade and Raw Materials, Naya Nathanielsen, believes up to 5 new mines could be sustainable in the next 5 to 10 years. Any more, she feels, would mean Greenland would not have sufficient control over its development. I always get 2 questions from the local population, she tells me. Is there a job for me at this mine, or my brother or sisters? And are you taking care of the environment? The current government is actively pursuing greater autonomy, but when it comes to a timeline for full independence for Greenland, the minister won't be pinned down. She admits the economy has to be self-sufficient first. In the meantime, she says that even though the island is small in terms of population size, that's not a reason to disregard the wishes of Greenlanders and what they want for their future. We are still a people, she tells me. We still have a right to decide what our place is in the world.
Bob Howard.
I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig from the Global Jigsaw podcast from the BBC, where we explore President Putin's idea of what it is to be Russian. It's packed up in one expression that's become the catchphrase of the moment, the Russian cultural code. We ask, what does it mean? The Global Jigsaw looks at the world through the lens of its media. Find us wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello, it's Ray Winstone. I'm here to tell you about my podcast on BBC Radio 4, History's Toughest Heroes. I've got stories about the pioneers, the rebels, the outcasts who define tough.
And that was the first time that anybody ever ran a car up that fast with no tires on. It almost feels like your eyeballs are going to come out of your head.
Tough enough for you? Subscribe to History's Toughest Heroes wherever you get your podcast.
In the US, a record number of people are being held in immigration detention following President Trump's crackdown. One controversial site has become the subject of several lawsuits attempting to shut it down, Alligator Alcatraz in Florida. The facility was rapidly constructed a few months ago with the goal of holding up to 3,000 detainees. Josephine Casserly reports from the centre, which sits on an abandoned airstrip amid the marshes, forests, mangroves and estuaries and wildlife of the Everglades.
When I first heard about Alligator Alcatraz, I thought that this scary-sounding alliterative name was a joke. But as we approach the detention centre, it's clear that it's not. We see a big blue sign with Alligator Alcatraz in white letters. The immigrant detention centre is on a disused airstrip, just off a long straight road which seems to go on forever through Florida's wetlands. On either side of the road, flat, uninterrupted swampland stretches out to the horizon. The swamp water is still and dark, and every now and again there's a ripple, a sign of something moving underneath. This area is famous for its alligators. There are 200,000 who live in the Everglades. And at a service station along the road, there are plastic models of cartoonish gators with their jaws wide open, filling the shelves. We pull over by the blue Alligator Alcatraz sign, and we're not the only ones. This sign's become something of a tourist attraction for people who are supportive of Trump's immigration policy. While we're parked up, we see a few groups of people stop and take pictures with the sign. An elderly couple, a man with his young son, and a trucker who takes a selfie. Let them go back to where they came from, he says in an Alabama drawl. But they're not the only people who are drawn to this stretch of road in Florida's swampland. There are a few cars parked up across from the sign. In one is a blue-haired protester who says she's concerned about the people inside. In another is Betty Osceola, who's in her 50s, with long grey hair tied back in a plait. She's from a Native American tribe called the Miccosukee. Some of her family live very close to the centre. She tells me that she used to come to the environment near the facility to look for plant medicines and to pray. It used to be a place of solitude, but it's hard to imagine that as we stand on the roadside with cars honking their horns as they whiz past and maintenance trucks pulling in and out of the detention facility. The cast of characters outside the centre gets more bizarre when we see a group of smartly dressed people and a couple of TV cameras. I discover that it's the Mexican consul and his team being interviewed by journalists from Mexican TV news. The consul is dressed smartly in a white shirt and trousers, and he's just been inside the centre to visit 39 Mexican nationals who are being held inside. His director of legal affairs tells me that the name of the detention centre provokes fear among the families of the people who are being kept there. He says that they sometimes have to reassure them that their loved one isn't at risk of being eaten by alligators. As we stand outside, the air is so hot and humid that it feels thick. We have a fuse of about 20 minutes before getting so hot that it's impossible to think. As well as alligators, there are birds of paradise and endangered panthers in this area, and huge dragonflies that hover around us. But there's one creature that we encounter more than any others, the mosquito. I'm advised by a local to wear a very fetching mosquito headnet, which I reluctantly do, and even with the headnet on, I end up with 16 bites on my face alone. There's a sense of mystery around what's going on inside this centre. It has the capacity to hold 2,000 people, but we don't know exactly how many are inside. Families report that it's hard to track down the details of loved ones who are there, and people are often transferred in and out, shipped off to different detention centres, sometimes in different states. We heard reports of poor conditions from families of those inside, such as overflowing toilets and insufficient food. And I speak to families of detainees who've had serious health conditions while inside and say they've not been consistently provided with medication. The Department for Homeland Security told us that the centre meets federal standards and that all these allegations are false. As journalists, we can't go into Alligator Alcatraz, which makes it hard to verify these accounts. Now, a judge has issued a preliminary ruling to shut down the centre, not because of allegations about what might be going on inside, but because of concerns about the impact of the construction on the protected wetlands. The litigation's ongoing and the state of Florida has already appealed, but even if this centre were permanently shut down by this lawsuit, more are likely to spring up. The Florida state governor recently announced that he's opening a brand new detention centre in the state. Its name? Deportation Depot.
Josephine Casserly, and you can hear more on this story on Crossing Continents on BBC Sounds. And finally, we're in the German city of Weimar at a cultural festival in the state of Thuringia. It's the largest festival for contemporary arts in eastern Germany and also reflects on the historical legacy of the Weimar Republic, a period of democratic government between the two world wars, known for both its vibrant cultural and artistic scene and economic instability. James Nochty went along to see some of its performances and installations and found echoes of the past in the present.
Sometimes it's comforting to be locked away with history. In Weimar, it's easy. Stroll around Goethe's house, where the gardener sometimes lets you pick a flower. Everyone was here. Schiller, Liszt, Bach was born not far away. The heroes of German culture swarm around. This city knows a time before everything. History grabs you to the point of pain. I was in a small cinema in the town for a new documentary about Buchenwald, set on a disconcertingly pretty hillside only a few miles away, the first concentration camp to be opened to the world when the American forces arrived in April 1945. With one of the survivors rescued as a teenager and still an upright man with an iron handshake, I watched haunting scenes like the 1,000 Weimar citizens marched to the camp by General George Patton to witness what had been done on their doorstep. The corpses, the graves, the living dead. We saw the flickering faces of the townsfolk on the screen. How much had they known? How much had they suspected? As the cinema went dark at the end, 300 or so people sat in silence without being asked to, for quite a long time. And if you're at a contemporary arts festival, the Kunstfest, you realise that Weimar, capital of Germany in its lost decade of the 1920s, still acts like a crossroads for culture and politics. I spoke to the Israeli artist Sigalit Landau, just arrived from an anti-Netanyahu demonstration in Tel Aviv. Her video installation showed a crystal-white stone tower from the Hitler era that still stands in Weimar. A woman climbs out of the tiny, high window in the tower and starts to paint the stone with a long brush, as if she's decorating it with a flower, or maybe a peacock's tail. But then there's a stream of red from the window. Blood. If you're an artist, Sigalit said to me, you can't just sit there and look at your belly button. She's in agony over Gaza, the destruction of lives and land, and the hostages, and Weimar was right for this. In the evening, a huge crowd watched yet another take on the Faust legend, immortalised in this town by the German poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. What if you sell your soul to the devil for all the world and find yourself not elevated or fulfilled, but empty to destruction? The South African director Brett Bailey calls his play Faust X, that envisages an Elon Musk-like figure on a madcap encircling of the world in search of any kind of power, on earth or beyond. War or peace, he says, what is wise is to profit from the situation. Savage satire, and at times circus. No one asked if Goethe would have approved. At the end, there's an icon of a tiny man in a spacesuit launched into nothingness. Time is the master, Mephistopheles says. The old man lies here in the sand. The clock stands still. Old men and time. Later that night I went to a grim industrial warehouse outside town to see a play about Russia, written by dissidents whose names were kept from us for their own protection. It featured a young woman far away from home, viscerally opposed to war, and her mother, still moved by the Russian national story as retold by Vladimir Putin. Love of country caught in perpetual conflict. The play, partly set in an old-style newsroom with clattering keyboards, was a conversation between them about the truth about their country, what it might be, and how they could tell. As we came out into the dark night, I asked someone what the building had once been. The answer was a munitions factory in the Nazi era. Full circle. On the train heading north the next morning, I passed through the state of Saxony-Anhalt. It's there that the AfD, the right-wing insurgent party, has one of its biggest followings. It is strongest across the old communist East Germany. Last year it was the largest party elected in Thuringia, including Weimar, and kept from power only by a desperate coalition of all the other parties. But polls suggest that the AfD could win outright in the state of Saxony-Anhalt next year. That would be the first state to fall to the AfD and bring to power some figures who are open, unapologetic neo-Nazis, the unashamed hardcore. My train rolled north towards Berlin, back to the future.
James Naughty. And that's all for today, but you can hear more stories on the From Our Own Correspondent podcast on BBC Sounds, including a dispatch on how 18th century-style riverside dining establishments are making a comeback in France. We'll be back again next Saturday morning. Do join us.
I'm Kate Lamble, and from BBC Radio 4, this is Derailed, the story of HS2. It's the tale of a railway which divided Britain. An ambitious idea brought down by political reality and what it tells us about why we struggle to build a better future. We'll hear the inside story of how the dream of HS2 was created before it morphed into a political nightmare and national punchline.
The absurd spectacle of a £100 million bat tunnel holding up the country's single biggest infrastructure project.
Through backroom deals, bat tunnels and the reality of power in the UK. Listen first on BBC Sounds.
I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig from the Global Jigsaw podcast from the BBC, where we explore President Putin's idea of what it is to be Russian. It's packed up in one expression that's become the catchphrase of the moment, the Russian cultural code. We ask, what does it mean? The Global Jigsaw looks at the world through the lens of its media. Find us wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello, it's Ray Winstone. I'm here to tell you about my podcast on BBC Radio 4, History's Toughest Heroes. I've got stories about the pioneers, the rebels, the outcasts who define tough.
And that was the first time that anybody ever ran a car up that fast with no tires on. It almost feels like your eyeballs are going to come out of your head.
Tough enough for you? Subscribe to History's Toughest Heroes wherever you get your podcast.